and welcome. So, I wanted to hop on here and give you an introduction. I just finished finalizing my microphone position here with my audio editor, who was so kind to help me make sure that I'm bringing you the best sound in a way that also lets you be able to see me when I am trying to talk to you. So, we optimized that today, and I wanted to try the new mic position out with a video that takes you through what's new on Patreon. We have started putting our detailed show notes for the podcast onto Patreon, and I wanted to give you an introduction to what that looks like. So let me show you around what's new. That's what's happening right now on That Shakespeare Life. So every week on That Shakespeare Life, we bring you a tidbit of Shakespeare's history. We dive into the kind of wine he drank, the kind of dishes he used, the clothes he wore, the friends he had, where he lived, all of these details about what made William Shakespeare the man that he is, and all the references for what was going on in 16th and 17th century England. We bring that out on the podcast through interviews with historians that have spent decades. We've had guests on that have studied for 10, 20, 30, sometimes 40 or even 50 years. They've been studying the subjects that they come on the podcast to talk with us about. And so it is an awesome opportunity to hear about these topics in detail. But on the podcast, we can only share so much history with you. And there's a ton of visual extras that are often really cool to explore. And we can't share them with you on the podcast, obviously, because that's an audio medium. So where we put these extras, if you really want to go behind the curtain and sort of dive in and see the primary documents that we're talking about, check out the archival information that we're mentioning and see some of the proof, if you will, behind the pudding, the things that help us verify what we know or why we think what we think about Shakespeare at this moment in time. All of that gets put into what's called detailed show notes for patrons. Now, previously, so before episode 374 on That Shakespeare Life, we'd been putting all of these over on castycash.com. And as you might imagine, that was a whole lot of bandwidth, and the website got a little heavy. So we have decided instead to move the detailed show notes over to Patreon, because all of the detailed content is for patrons anyway. When you go to castycash.com, you can log in there on all of our older episodes. It's still there. You can see it and access it. You log in with your Patreon credentials and it opens them all up over there. But now, moving forward, it takes you over to Patreon and you log in directly on the Patreon page. So let me share over here and I'll just show you what I'm talking about. Da, da, da. Let's see. So here we go. This will be sharing the internet. Oop, that's something else entirely. Nope, still something else. There we go. I've got a lot of work going on here today, so we had a couple of things to scroll through. But here we go. So this week we're talking about John Fletcher, and we're meeting with a guest called Domenico Lavasio. You may have heard of him or read some of his work, but his most recent research has been into some archival evidence that suggests John Fletcher and William Shakespeare were actually neighbors. There's some tax records that show that they were living literally walking distance from each other on the same street, actually, called Bishopsgate Street in London. And he's walking us through that history. And so here is a preview of the detailed show notes. So when you're a patron of our show, not only do you get to listen to the conversation and hear Domenico tell you about his research and what he's uncovered, but then you can also follow along. So obviously we start out with a picture of John Fletcher, so you can see who he is, and we explain kind of what he did, but then all of the references that Domenico is talking about. He talks about Stow's survey of London and the record of Richard Fletcher being the Bishop of Worcester, and we provide that to you. He talks about the Morgan map from 1667. That's actually available in a couple of places. The London Pictures Archives doesn't let me share it with you, but the British History Online does. So I link you to both, but the picture is actually from the one that I'm allowed to share. But anyway, so we have maps of what he's talking about, and we show you the Bishopsgate. And I'm going pretty fast here because obviously I want you to log in as a patron to get to see it, but I wanted you to see what patrons get access to. So here's the tax records that we talked about. So in the church warden's accounts, which lists the inhabitants from 1595 to Christmas of 1596, there is a Master Fletcher. Now that's available at the London Archives, which is not digital, but there's the record if you want to go look that up. And then I highlighted this for you, but this is actually from the London Archives. Folger Shakespeare Library is the reason we're able to see this digitally. So thank you, Folger. Oh, so many thanks to Folger. They're always the reason we can access these documents without having to go to England. So it's really awesome. But they have William Shakespeare there in what's called a lay subsidy role. I'll explain what that is in just a minute. And we talk about it this week on Twitter and Instagram. I share with you this image and sort of explain what the lay subsidy roles are. Anyway, but that's all the kind of detail. And there's actually a map in there I did not scroll through that Domenico provided for patrons, and it has it highlighted. Like it shows you where John Fletcher's house was, and then it circles where they believe William Shakespeare's house was, and they're literally this far apart on the map. So if you've got Bishopsgate, you have Shakespeare living down here, and Fletcher was living right up there. Now, at the time, John Fletcher was about 17 years old, and William Shakespeare, I mean, arguably, there's some question over whether or not he would have known him, but they do go on to collaborate later. So Domenico's work is putting that evidence together and posturing the question of, is that where their collaboration may have started? Did they start out as friends and neighbors before they ended up being colleagues in the theater? Now, there's a lot of research that goes into that. We talk about most of it on the podcast episode. So if you'd like to hear more about that, go to castycash.com/episode 378. You can listen to the entire conversation completely for free. The whole podcast is available anywhere you get your podcasts. I do recommend listening to it at castycash.com because I have a lot of extras packed into the show notes where you can find out about Domenico, links to his research. If you're super into John Fletcher and you want to chase that rabbit further, all of his work on that is linked there, so you can go directly to what he talks about. And then, of course, you can access the detailed show notes from that page as well. And all that is logging in as a patron, and it takes you straight over to the page I just scrolled through for you. And every week, our podcast episodes have these extras baked in, where if you are a super fan of Shakespeare, you can dive in and explore the extras with every episode. And a lot of times the extras are not only things that I've researched and put together, but the guests will often provide a lot of primary documents as well from their work, some of which I can share images with you of. But when the images aren't public domain and I'm not allowed to share it out with you, we can generally provide links over to where you can go and find them. So we don't just leave you hanging there. I try to make sure that if you're researching this or you're interested in the topic, you have some places you can start to go find out more. And we pack all of that into the detailed show notes for patrons. If you've been on Patreon a while, you also know that's the place where if you want to join Experience Shakespeare, that's kind of our premium membership. So you go one step further. Instead of just diving into the history behind each episode, you can really dive into the life of William Shakespeare. We have documentary films, virtual tours. We've gone on tours of Kenilworth Castle. The folks over at Pontefract Castle took us behind the scenes of their archaeological dig there. That's available on Patreon. And we also have the hands-on activity kits. I produce about 2 or 3 of these a year, but there is a library of over a dozen of them in there. And they are games, recipes, and crafts from the life of William Shakespeare that you can do on your own at home with everyday items. So you don't have to have specialty stuff, but you could make, you can make iron gall ink. You can make posset pie. We've made a wassail. My brain blanked. Every Christmas we usually will make apple wassail together in the Patreon community. So if you are into trying out some of the history, Experience Shakespeare is a great place to do that. But since we just moved everything over to Patreon, I wanted to use this time to tell you about what's there, how you can find the extras. We're so glad that you're listening to the podcast and that you are enjoying the conversations. I know I am. It's been a dream of mine to get to sit down over cup of coffee and talk with these storied experts about my favorite subject, which is the life of William Shakespeare, which is so much fun to explore. And every time we think we've reached the end of what there is to know, there's always more fun and interesting questions to be asked. So join us over on Patreon, and be sure, if you are a loyal podcast listener or higher, so loyal podcast listener is $5 a month. If you are loyal podcast listener or higher, make sure that you are messaging me your ideas. If you've got a question about Shakespeare you want me to chase down, or you'd like me to find an expert to come and talk with us about, please send it my way. I'm always looking for good ideas, for guest suggestions, and I want to make sure that we're covering the history you want to know most about. So make sure that you're telling me that. I prioritize patron requests first in my list of what do you want to see on the show. So make sure you let me know that. Thanks for being here. Thank you for enjoying following along on the journey and studying Shakespeare. And do let me know what you think about the sound quality so I can report back to my audio editor about my mic position and see what you think about this sound if it's better. And that's it. So enjoy your Saturday. Thank you for spending part of it with me here to learn about what we do on That Shakespeare Life. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye.